Okay, welcome to another edition of the Edlow Podcast. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. I always say I'm excited about this guest, but I am. I have Riley. Is it Tejcek? I should have asked before we came on.
You're good. It's Tejcek.
Tejcek. That's even cooler. Okay, so Riley Tejcek, and I wanted to get in touch with you because you are so outside of the box. Looking at you, we would be like, no way that this is, you've done all these things. First of all, we have a lot in common. We both enjoy Carmel, Indiana.
Yes.
And we're both very sporty. You're a little bit more sporty than me, and that you are an Olympic bobsledder, right?
For Team USA. Yep.
For Team USA. Okay.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, also, you're a Marine.
Yeah.
Man. So, okay, we got to go back to the beginning. So, well, not all the way to the beginning. Let's start right there. What made you want to be a Marine?
Yeah. No, thanks for not letting me answer the question about how my parents decided that I was ready to be born. But
Yeah.
Talking more about the Marine Corps and how that journey really came about. A big thing I always preach on, I always tell people is, as young kids, we always have dreams of what we want to be when we grow up. And for me, that was not a Marine. In fact, that had never crossed my mind, I think, ever. I know never. My parents can attest to it. So it wasn't really until I got to college. So I played Division I softball at George Washington University in DC. And I was 18 years old, so excited to get out of Indiana, away from my parents. And I ended up meeting a Marine recruiter. And I was instantly just like drawn to the kind of man that he was as a Marine, right? He squared away. He had the best looking uniform. He spoke really well. He also was a collegiate athlete and just talked to me about like, hey, you want to do something special with your life? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Let's talk.
Right.
And, he's talking to the athlete in me who's like, hey, you get to train and work out as part of your job every day. And I'm like, check. He's like, you get to travel the world and go to different places. Check. You get to be a servant leader and lead as Christ did in a way by serving, your nation and doing things that other people don't want to do. Only 1% of people do. I'm like, check. And he's like, oh yeah. And you can go to beautiful places, San Diego, Hawaii, Japan, live this. And I'm like, you don't have to convince me anymore. Like I'm already sold. So I was 18 years old. I made that decision to go to officer candidate school that summer. So I was playing Division I softball, and in my summers was going to basically officer candidate school, or our boot camp version for officers. So once I graduated college in 2019, I was able to commission straight away and become a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps.
Man, that is awesome. So now, before you went off to college, did you have any idea what you wanted to do?
So I accepted my softball scholarship very early. I was thinking I was like 16 maybe. So I knew forever I was going to DC. I knew I was going to be at George Washington. So I knew that I wanted to work somehow for the government. So I knew that I studied political science. That had been, a goal of mine. And I was very passionate about giving back. 9/11, I was 4 when it happened. So I don't remember it, but I remember the aftermath of it. And so to that, I'm like, well, I want to do something. Being in DC, being here, I interned for someone on the Hill, like a lot of people do, but I didn't know the military was possible because I never saw a female in uniform, let alone a female Marine.
Right.
Growing up in Indiana, there's no big military bases or anything like that. So we don't really have that military community. But in my mind, in the early 2000s, you saw G.I. Jane. You didn't see long, blonde hair, blue eye girls that were joining the Marine Corps and being successful. And so my whole message that I try to portray right now to people is trying to get the image of me out, not for me, but for others to see me and be like, wait a minute, that's not what I thought of. Break those stereotypes down to where people don't ask me like they do now. Wait, really? You're a Marine? And I'm like, why do you look so surprised?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting you bring up 9/11. I was in Indiana as a missionary when 9/11 happened. I was in Huntington, Indiana when it happened. And what I found so interesting about that time was that was probably the first and last time in my life where we all weren't Democrats, Republicans, or anything. We were all just Americans, and everybody was kind of united. And it was really interesting to me, being a missionary, how people turned to God a bit. You mentioned, I believe, you said that you're religious, right?
I am a Christian. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and one of the things I found really interesting, I'm from California. I just took my two boys. We were in Carmel, just as I said off air, we were in Carmel this last week. And one of the things that everybody comments when they come from California is how many churches there are in Indiana. I feel like there's just giant, like big churches everywhere. Yeah. I remember I served a little bit of time, my first 7 months. I was in like the Fall Creek area right there, and they have the Eastern Star Baptist Church right there. And I showed my kids, I'm like, this is a mega church. You know what I mean? I was like, it's gigantic, you know? And so, was your family religious? Is that how you kind of became Christian, or is that a choice you made yourself, or how'd that work?
Both. So growing up, my mom had gone to Catholic school throughout high school. And my dad's mom, so my grandma, was really involved in the Catholic Church as well. She was the one who like passed out Eucharist and everything like that. So growing up, we had a very Catholic background. So Our Lady of Mount Carmel is a very big, well-known church. We were really plugged in, we as in my sister and I and my family, into that church. Now, the caveat to that was sport. Once I started playing softball, we got, the travel season and all that kind of stuff. The tournaments were Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. So often we started to see this like split as I started getting more and more involved in sport. Softball travel started becoming outside of the state of Indiana. Sundays was championship Sundays, and that kind of fell to the wayside. So I had the foundation of, I knew that there was a God. I knew how to pray, but I just kind of felt a disconnect for me personally. I felt like, and again, this is my own opinions and beliefs, was just that with the Catholic faith, there was a little bit of a barrier between me and the Lord. And I was seeking and searching for that relationship. So it wasn't until college when I started being really poured into by my teammates, started going to Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and then felt from a non-denominational like church standpoint, that direct relationship with Christ, where there was no barriers. And it's essentially reading the Bible and listening to God, having a relationship with God, going to a church where there is no priest that's kind of in between you and the Lord. And again, everyone practices this different. We all believe the same things at the end of the day. And all I want is people to have the freedom to exercise what they want. But for me, this is where I found that proximity with Christ that I really was searching for, was to have that direct access and relationship with him and be able to read the Bible for myself and like just pray from my heart, and not anything I had to memorize or anything like that. So my life was changed when I was saved and in 2017 again, and I've never looked back since. And it's been the greatest journey following Christ, and he is why I have everything that I do.
Man, so it's such a backwards college experience. You're like, chicks are going out and going to partying, and then here you are, you're becoming a major Christian, joining the Marine Corps. It's such an interesting, more refreshing thing.
Yeah, for anyone who's listening to this that knew me in college, there was like a 2 year of trying to find myself though. Like I right? won't lie, like I wasn't perfect, and it took me down that road to realize of that fulfillment that I was searching for was Christ. It wasn't going to parties, drinking alcohol, boys, jobs, sports, grades, right? It's like that fulfillment I was searching for wasn't those things. So there definitely was a point in college, you're 18, 19, 20, and you're trying to like figure out.
Yeah, so find yourself. Yeah.
But praise God, he came and got me when he did.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is sometimes that's, as a missionary, what I found was, it was interesting how God kind of comes into someone's life when they're really like, they're searching for something, right? Like maybe there's something happens in their family, a tragedy, or even a situation like yours. Like I spent the last 7 months of my mission in South Bend at Notre Dame campus. And there were a number of people in that age group that were like, I'm trying to figure out, especially at Notre Dame where, it's so religious. Right. And there's a ton of people who are getting doctorates in religion. we had some very interesting discussions. So that does make sense that that's a time frame when people kind of are searching for something, and glad you found Christ. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So now, so tell me now, I'm also a political science background. So, do you have anything in your thought process of becoming a JAG or anything like that?
I don't. That's my sister is in law school right now. I am so proud of her.
Okay.
It's hilarious that the Marines try to reach out to her and they're like, "Oh, we know your sister. We think you'd be great." My sister's like, "You already got one of us.
Yeah.
You're not getting me too." My sister and I are very different, but to be honest, no, that never really crossed my mind. I don't really have a passion for that as much. I really wanted to lead Marines. I wanted to be an officer of Marines. And when you're in the JAG, we need them and they are so special. And I've had to take Marines to JAGs and interact with them, but I wanted more of that experience where I was a platoon commander and in it with the Marines and being able to take command and stuff like that. So I didn't assume that role. What I was really thankful for, though, was the holistic point of view that political science gave me. And people are like, "Oh, politics, ugh." And I'm like, yeah, well, I kind of feel the same way. But a lot of what I looked at was like comparative politics or studying countries that were a little bit more war prone and why. And what was the government structures they had there and where did it fail? Was democracy best when we saw this big push of democracy in a bunch of countries in the Middle East and you know, people pushing to it? Why not? Why? And history. So I'm kind of a nerd and like plugging and chugging and figuring that out. Sure. And that actually helps so much. On my past deployment, I was deployed to Iraq May to November and able to understand where I was in the world and what their political structure was because I had studied it back in college. So to me, that was kind of the icing on the cake in the sense of what I actually learned in college. I was able to apply in some fashion, and then an ongoing understanding of political atmosphere of Russia and Ukraine. I studied Crimea back in 2017, and I knew that there was massive tension between Russia and Ukraine. And I'm not going to say project, but I could see then when war broke out, how there's so much more rooted behind that because of the political structure that I found through my political science degree. So not to like nerd out that like people can't study and figure that out either, but it is cool when you are able to major in something, study something, and apply it in a very interesting, fun way that isn't maybe necessarily a path that most people go down.
Yeah. And I think that it's also, I would recommend anybody study it, although not a lot of job prospects coming out with a unless you want to work for the government, there's really not a lot you can do with a poli-sci major other than go to law school. But I found it to be incredibly useful in just understanding political systems and how they work. I did a lot of studying just political finance and where it comes from and understanding, you know, it's really interesting when I tell all my friends, you know, everybody's so divided these days. I tell them, I go, if you really look at voting patterns, you'll find that most of the time they're all voting exactly the same. It's like George Carlin used to say, it's a big club and you ain't in it, you know? and it was like, you know, and so I'm actually, it's fascinating to see what's going on right now in government and how kind of de-gutting some of these things and really breaking open and seeing where some of this money is going. And it's quite scary, you know?
Yeah.
So now the interesting thing is as someone your age, because if you graduated in 2020?
2019.
Okay. So at your age, patriotism tends to be kind of poo-pooed a little bit. Did you always feel kind of patriotic and you know, towards America, or was this something that you learned through poli-sci or being a Marine? How did that come about?
The Midwest, I think, is pretty pro-America. Growing up in Indiana, you know, a lot of United States flags everywhere, very friendly. People know like the Midwest and stuff like that. So I did feel like where I grew up was very pro-America, patriotic area in general. What I will say is nature, nurture, all these things. I also believe it was because of my parents as well. So my dad in particular took a massive liking to the Navy SEALs. A lot of people do, right?
Yeah.
And as the Navy SEALs was just starting to like get talked about. Just slowly, they started making these videos about buds and the process and people dropping out and the training and all this kind of stuff. And my dad took a massive liking to it, which meant my dad was my softball coach. My dad was a professional baseball player. Naturally, I took a liking to it. And so I kind of grew up in a household was like, we thank men and women for their service, right? We are very appreciative. The military is like top notch, you know, and looked at to them at a high regard and a high standard. Obviously, coming to school in DC, you know, that unleashes a whole nother level of being able to live in a college dorm room less than half a mile from the White House, from the Lincoln Memorial, from the Capitol, all of these things. So that puts an even bigger sense of pride. And then to just the cherry on top, yeah, you spend one day at officer candidate school in the Marine Corps and you're the most rah-rah gung-ho, like, I love this country, like, give me a gun and let me defend it kind of thing. So I would say that it was there all along, and the military has just like brought out that natural passion that I've had all along. Because I love my country more than anything. And when I get to compete for Team USA for bobsled, but also represent the Marine Corps and have, you know, United States Marine across my chest, both of those are some of like the highest badges of honor, in my opinion, that I possibly can, because I do love my country. I love being able to work for it and defend it at the same time. And to your point, in my personal opinion, I would say there's a lot of people in my generation maybe that aren't as patriotic, and we already had talked about it briefly, but I think it was kind of that post 9/11 that, you know, we've been in wars for a very long time in the Middle East. I got my fair share of it as well. And I think that there's just a disconnect between generations of what truly happened and the aftermath when you were seeing it and you lived it versus, oh, I've heard stories about it. But overall, I want to see this country united. I want to see Americans strong. And I think that everyone who lives here, if anyone has traveled to another country, can see that truly we are blessed to be in this country. We have so many rights and opportunities. The fact that I can even speak upon it. And so I'm just really blessed to be here, and I love serving.
You know, I want to ask, you know, you mentioned you deployed. Tell me how living in another country, I feel like a lot of people who are kind of like anti-America or say things, you know, criticize American politics in America, I don't think they've ever really been outside of America. You know, I've interviewed a few people from the military on this podcast, and they all are very much like, this is the best place, because they've served all over and they've seen what other people deal with, particularly in the Middle East, and said, you don't understand how good you have it. Perhaps you can talk about how going and deploying in Iraq and living there for 6 months or so, how that colored your views.
Yeah, so I've been blessed and fortunate that I've been able to spend a lot of time in different countries, not just for the military. So I can talk about Iraq, but I also spent a couple months in Kyrgyzstan. I also went on a missions trip to South Korea, and then, you know, I've been to a couple other countries for vacation and such as the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and you see the way people live. So from a military perspective, and just from going to other places of the world, you don't question how clean your water is. Normally. You don't question whether or not, you know, the food that you're eating isn't going to cause you to be sick. And what I will say is, at least like from Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and those kinds of stuff, you go away from those tourist regions and you see people just with nothing. You see huts. You don't see hard structures. So if any disaster, storm, or anything came by, like, it could knock their house down. And when I was in the Middle East, for me as a woman, you hear about the fact that there's men that marry multiple wives, and women are meant to, you know, have kids. Like, that is their sole responsibility, is to take care of the kids and be there for the kids. There are no women that I saw serving in their military that have some of the freedoms, you know, or rights or anything like that. And so those things were kind of eye-opening, where you're just like, oh my goodness. But on deployment, then I want you to we'll go to the next level. I'm at an American base, but I'm in a different country, and I'm in a country where, yeah, I have to drink bottled water 24/7. I have to brush my teeth with bottled water. We take showers, but it's like, be cautious of how much like water gets inside your body and all this kinds of stuff. You look at the methods of transportation and like the streets, like something as simple as like the structure of the streets. Because when you drive in the streets and there's like no rules, it's the Wild West. It is insane and it's crazy.
Yeah.
And you worry about like yourself for a second. You're like, I don't know where cars are coming from, this, that, the other. Or, I mean, even the things you have, being able to go to the store, go somewhere like Walmart or Target that like literally has everything you could ever imagine, or the ability to find high paying jobs and work, or the access to education. You realize that as well. Not everyone has access, and people I think kind of take college for granted now. It's like, oh, it's just something that you do, but in so many other places, people are privileged. And then another thing that I realize is people in other countries have to study like multiple other languages, because their only way to get out of their country or to be successful or make enough money is to learn languages like English or Spanish or French or, anything else like that. So when you look at what they have to do and what they have to go through and just the differences, you just grow a different appreciation. So to anyone who has never left the United States, it is an eye-opening experience to leave and see how other cultures function and run. Not to say, one is worse than the other or anything like that, but you do realize the things that you have, you're like, I feel safe. I'm thankful for the little things. I'm glad I know where my food comes from. I have shelter, and I get to exercise my rights and freedoms appropriately.
Yeah. Perhaps you can talk about, being like you said, you don't see a lot of female Marines, right? What would you say are, I don't know if I would say pros and cons, but like what would you say were some of the things maybe that you found refreshing and things that surprised you about being a female in the Marine Corps?
That's a really good question. I think some things that I guess surprised me was how, a lot of my Marines have expressed the fact that, we've never had a woman leader before, but ma'am, like, I feel really comfortable with you. Like, I feel like I can express myself and my feelings and the hard things that I'm going through. Not in like a soft, weird way, but like, hey, I have suicidal ideations and I think I need help. I think I'm struggling with sleep apnea from my post-traumatic stress disorder, and I haven't been able to talk to anyone like this. And you kind of allow me to feel safe and talk about this. And so I don't know if that's more of like a womanly role, kind of where, maybe it feels safer and I'm not in your face, like screaming and all this kinds of stuff. But that really took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting the Marines to kind of open up to me in that capacity of being like, well, I feel safe and I feel comfortable talking to you, which I think is kind of a superpower. Not that, oh, it's men versus women and this. A Marine is a Marine is a Marine. I'm not a female Marine. I am a Marine. And a male Marine is not a male Marine. He's a Marine. However, when you have a group of people that come from all different walks of life and experiences, there's different leaders that are going to play better to some of our Marines. And so I think the fact that for so long, so many Marines haven't had a female role or influence maybe hasn't allowed them to express themselves fully to the way that they wanted. So that was really awesome. Two, something that I was really happy about is that I was a little bit nervous that because that I was a woman, I would struggle more, or that people would look at me differently and this, that, and the other. And overall, 99% of my experience has been extremely positive. I'm not looked at any differently because I'm a woman. I'm not hushed. I'm not, my opinion is still taken into consideration just as much as my male counterparts. Like, I really didn't notice as much of a difference as I potentially thought that I would. Now, I have been the only female to walk into a room and, sit around all men, and sure, like, that's a different dynamic maybe that people aren't used to. But I also realize, and this is a message to anyone out there listening, that I didn't have to be like one of the guys to fit in. And once I learned that, I didn't have to act like something I wasn't. Like, I just showed up as, you know, Captain Tejcek. And yeah, like, this is me. Like, I'm a girly girl. Like, listen, I don't curse. I say y'all, I laugh. I'm personable. Like, I want to know about your life. I share, you know, who I am, and I like to be bubbly and laugh, but I also want to get the heck after it. And, you know, I'm going to smoke you in PT. So let's go. And what I realized from that experience was me being able to be me and not feeling like I had to fit into like this boys club was actually like the best thing I possibly could have done. So I think that was a little bit surprising to me because I assumed to fit in, I had to be like something I wasn't. And I learned after like day one, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be me. And if you like me, cool. If you don't, like, whatever. And that has worked out and was so awesome for me so far in my 6 years active duty.
Yeah, you know, that's what's so interesting is like I think, you know, we see these movies about like, you know, women in roles like yours, and the movies always start out with like a bunch of guys that are just being really mean and trying to like, you know, kind of prove that a woman can't do it. And it sounds like that kind of wasn't your experience, at least most of the time wasn't your experience.
Yeah. And that's what I would say. I'm not going to say that I haven't been, certain comments haven't been made or stuff of the fact that I was a woman or my looks or something in that capacity, right? It happens, everybody. But I would say 99% of the time, to your point, exactly. Like, I didn't feel like I was treated any different. I just knew that I was going to stay true to myself. And more so, if anything, that's just a life lesson. I wasn't going to be wrapped around people's feelings of me because I can't control them and I can't change them.
Sure.
So that in itself was very freeing. But to your point, yes, back in the day before I entered in 2019, I have no doubt that it was a much different environment and experience for women. However, when I came in 2019, there had been plenty of women who paved the way for that, so that there wasn't, I never noticed anything different.
Yeah.
And I'm very thankful for the women who did go through those things. But to any women who want to come into it, I'm like, hey, that's actually not going to be your experience at all. Yeah, you know, the Marines are a minority of women, are officers, right? I think right now it's like 9 to 10%, which obviously that's not very many, but by no means are you going to be like the only anymore, because we are consistently increasing our numbers because there are awesome females out there that can hit it.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that a lot of the people under your stewardship, they come to you and they say they feel comfortable and safe to talk to you about things like suicidal ideation, which I'm sure that's got to be one of the most important things. Do you think that is because you are a female, or do you think there are some traits that other people could emulate that you have that maybe makes people feel safe?
I think it can be a mixture of both. I think it depends on the situation. I know sometimes different Marines in their walks of life, you know, only had a mom, you know, they grew up in a single mother household. So maybe the fact that I was a woman, you know, maybe showed some of those things. To your point, I think a lot of it is probably just who I am as a person in general, which is something that can be seen by anyone. I think when I'm able to relate to my Marines, how I am and how I feel, and show up and be authentic, but also show them that I care about them more than anything, and they're the reason why I work so hard is to provide for them and be the best leader I can for them, that they realize that it's safe, you know, knowing that I have an open door policy. Everyone says that. It's one thing to say that. It's one thing to do that. It's one thing to answer your phone at midnight when they do call because you told them to, and then they know that. They know you're predictable. They know you'll show up for them. But I will say, I think part of it is because I'm not a yeller. I don't scream. I don't curse. I'm kind of like the disappointed mom. Like when they're in trouble, it's like, oh, I have to go tell Cam. You know, it's one of those things. Like, I'm not going to chew them out. I mean, I'm going to give it to them, but it's going to be in a way of like, I want you to think on this, Marine. I want you to think of why this was wrong, how you're going to fix it the next time. And I'm going to let you know that you really let me down. And so, like, parenting is kind of the way I see it, right? Like, there's sometimes that certain techniques work better on the moms than they do the dads, but doesn't mean that you can't both have the same thing. So I think it depends on the situation, but I was pleased at least to know that people felt comfortable talking about sexual assault, suicidal ideation, getting in depth with like things that they're struggling with, relationships, financial, you know, we all anyone who joins the military and is an officer knows that that's inherently one of your responsibilities is troop welfare.
Mhm.
But it's another thing to be able to actually get them to want to share so that you can help. As crazy as that sounds, that's one of my favorite parts of my job is helping a deficiency and being able to find that with the Marine and being able to talk through it and work through it and seeing them come out on the other side and be successful.
Yeah. Now, with that, if there are women who are listening to this who want to join the Marine Corps, what are some things that you would say that you wish you had known before, or maybe some things that you would say, hey, here's some things you really got to prep for if you're coming in?
So in general, if you're going to be a Marine officer, you got to run. And that's what everyone says. But you got to be able to run. But you need to be strong. And you have to be able to run 3 to 5 miles, but you have to be able to hike. And that's where a lot of women, there's some deficiency there as well, is, carrying 150 pounds on your back is going to break a lot of people over time. Like, you need to be able to have the strength and endurance. When I first came in, I thought, just about run. And I was lucky because I had a softball background. So I was very powerful and strong and all that stuff anyway. So I had that base of being able to put however much weight on my back, and it was no factor. What I will say for women in general, not something I wish I knew, but something that I'm very, I harp on often when I speak to women when they're about to go through. You are not competing against the other women around you. When you are a minority, you often feel like you are the one and the only, and the eyes are looked at you more. Absolutely, because they are. However, that does not mean that when you're going through officer candidate school or boot camp or any of this kind of stuff, it's you versus the other women. You are on a team, and everyone can pass. There's enough places for everyone to get through boot camp and pass with flying colors. But oftentimes, that was awesome. But oftentimes I see so many people have to be like, well, I'm better than you and I'm stronger than you and she's a weak woman, so I don't want to be associated with her, and basically try to kick people out of the flock. Instead of bring people in and be like, hey, we got you. Like, what do you need help with? Let's work together as a team because we are a team. And so I think for whatever reason, when I was going through all my courses, I saw that more in the women than the men, was that the women would degrade each other more and be harder on each other. And we were harder on ourselves than the men were on themselves when it was time for peer mentorship and peers leading peers. And we're hazing each other. We're like, why are we doing this? Why are we making our lives miserable? And so all that to say, wrap it up, you're all on the same team and multiple people can succeed. There's plenty of seats at the table for everyone to be successful. And just because someone else fails doesn't mean that you one up them.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I have noticed, so I have 2 boys and 2 girls, right? And, I have a daughter who's a sophomore in high school and one who's 8th grade. And I would say 7th and 8th grade girls are so relentless on each other compared to anyone else I've ever seen. Like my boys, them and their friends, I mean, they never have problems. I mean, if they do, it's very, very rare, and it usually gets squashed very, very quickly. Whereas my daughter in 7th grade, it just seemed like every other day these girls were going at each other for crazy reasons. And I don't know why that is. I joke with them. I'm like, it's girl on girl crime again. You know what I mean? I don't know what that is, because I would think that, especially in a situation like the Marines, they're looking for people who are going to buoy everyone up, right? I mean, isn't that what they're kind of hoping for?
Yeah, it is. But it's one of those things that everyone who got into officer candidate school passed the same set of standards to get there. So everyone who's there is deserving of being there. Everyone came in the same way through the same door. And my main thing is why can't we all walk out of that door in success? If we have the opportunity to fight for the same cause, fight for the same nation, be a part of the same unit, why are we not bonding together? And to your point, there's some cattiness, there's some just straight mean people that are just why? Why? But I will even say this about the veteran community in general. I have been blown away, and I talk about this all the time, of how many veterans will attack current military members or other veterans. I'm like, guys, there's 1% of the population, less than 1% of the population that serves. we are all on the same team. Like, we all went through the same sacrifices, but sometimes it's a sense of like, well, you didn't have it as hard as I did, so your service is less. Or you didn't go on a deployment, so you're not a real Marine. And it's like, what? Like, as if what their service looked like has to be compared to you for you to feel justified that you did something right. And so it's kind of like the same principle. It's like, when you're on the same team pursuing the same things, why do we feel a need to attack the people that are the few people doing the hard things anyway? Like, why are we making it hard on each other? So again, I'm sure there's men that do it as well. I've only witnessed it from my perspective and what I've seen in women. And so any woman that reaches out to me that is going through, I always tell them this. I said, your job is to be squared away. And then you need to be so squared away so you can help all the people around you and make sure that they're squared away. And team up with the women. Do not attack one another. Do not speak badly about the other women. You are on a team and you're all chasing and pursuing the same goal. I said, and when you allow that to happen, some of those women are going to become some of your best friends. Because some of my best friends I have met day one at Officer Candidate School. She was also from Indiana. We had never met before. To this day, we talk all the time. We've been in each other's weddings, all the stuff. And she is absolutely my best friend in the whole entire world. We went through one of the hardest things together. She was a stud. I was a stud. Generally, what would happen is you would assume that you would clash and it would be like negative and I would try to one up and beat her. But instead, two great forces came together, was like, dude, you're awesome. And she's like, well, you're awesome. And we were able to elevate each other. And we're still doing it to this day, over 10 years later.
That's awesome. That's so good. And there needs to be more of that just in life in general. You know, we live in this world where people just, it seems like they just hate on success, you know, and it's just unfortunate because there is enough in this world for everyone to succeed. And just because one person maybe is getting somewhere that you haven't gotten there yet, that doesn't, there's no connection between one person's success and yours, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Just because they made it doesn't mean that you can't. If anything, they have a paved way and they could help you or offer you advice.
Right. Yeah. It really, I have so many people in my life that I've seen where they see someone else get, like, it's almost like they want to see you successful, but not quite as successful as them, you know? And once you're getting a little bit ahead of them, they start really backbiting and jealous and getting angry and talking trash and doing those things. And I've never understood it. I've never had something where I've thought to myself, that guy got something and I'm mad at him because he got it and I didn't. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense, but I don't know.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
100%. So now let's talk about bobsledding. Where did that come from?
Common question. It originated in the Winter Olympics. No, I'm just kidding. So how I got involved with bobsled goes back to college. So where I played college softball at, there was an alumni who also played college softball at George Washington who turned bobsledder. So that's where the whole story, that's where the pieces fell together. The Lord kind of put that on my heart from her and her story. And it was a seed that was planted in 2018 when I met Alana, and she had just won silver. And it didn't really come to fruition until 2 years later when it was the midst of COVID. I finished all my mandatory Marine training and I was searching for something more. I knew that God put something else on my heart. I wanted to keep competing. I didn't know what it looked like. And I saw that bobsled was having a virtual tryout, and I decided to be bold and courageous and put myself out there.
Wow. So now, excuse me, the training, I got to imagine, for being a Marine versus being a bobsledder is different, because bobsled is like, you know, quick, fast. You got like a tenth of a second. You're trying to get in that sled as quickly as you can and get off to it and go 90 miles an hour. So was that a hard transition since you had just done all the boot camp stuff?
It's extremely hard even to this day.
Oh, because you're still training both, right?
Yeah. And every year there's cycles and my body looks different. I get a little bit more moody from time to time, depending on what I'm doing and having to lose weight and cut weight and all this stuff. But you hit the nail on the head. Bobsled, short, fast, explosive, powerful, which means short sprints. I weigh a good amount of weight because something that's heavier is going to move faster downhill. Mm-hmm. Heavy weightlifting, squats, deadlifts, all things, but quick, short bursts, and then relax. It's like a cheetah. Mm-hmm. The Marine Corps is like a long ending, never stopping gazelle, where it's like, hey, you need to be able to run like 3 to 5 miles and be able to maintain a fast, pace. You need to be able to do, pull-ups, and planks, which happens to be an exercise that is really nice when you don't have all this lower body extra weight in your glutes and your thighs and stuff like that.
100%.
And, the Marine Corps essentially is looking at you to be able to sustain for long periods of time, but more so be able to manage your own body weight and then have weight on top of it for long periods of time. So they're completely opposite. And they expect completely different things. And so I have, for the past 4 to 5 years, struggled because the Marines have 2 tests, PFT, CFT. The CFT, combat fitness test, is that short, quick, explosive, all that stuff. Perfect. Me and that test get on really well. The physical fitness test, which is our standard entry test, is a 3-mile run. For me and my age group, it's 12 pull-ups and a 3:45-minute plank. And oh, by the way, a perfect run score for a woman at my age is 21 minutes. Wow. Which is 7-minute 3 miles. So people are like, well, you're fit. You work out all the time. And I'm like, oh, 100%. I train 6 days a week. This, that, the other. But when Bobsled wants me to be able to move 300 pounds for 3 in a squat, super fast and explosive, and the Marine Corps is like, hey, go run 7-minute paces for 3 miles. They don't.
Yeah, because you got more muscle, more weight on you, so it's harder to move it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm heavier, and so naturally, what happens every year is my seasons are a little bit mixed up, but January, calendar year, January to March, I'm in the midst of bobsled season. March, bobsled ends. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. It's just been 6-month season, but I have to straight go into PFT training. So then I had to start training for the 3-mile and all that kind of stuff, which naturally I'll lose about 10 pounds just by training. And I'm like, at the end of my season, I'm tired. Everyone's taking 2 to 3 weeks off, and I'm like crushing myself running. I normally do my physical fitness test somewhere in May, early May, end of May, because it's due by June. And then as all my teammates and competitors are rested, ready to hit the ground running again, for the sprints and all that kind of stuff, I now am 10 pounds lighter, have to then flip that switch again, put on all the weight back on, train that much harder than everyone else, have no rest, work that all the way up until September, where my fitness tests for bobsled are, and then start season in October, back to that January until March, and then do it again. So it is exhausting. It is tiring. It hurts, and it's not fun. And it makes me feel like I'm constantly at a disadvantage because from year to year, it's like recycling instead of like growth and growth and growth and growth. So it makes it tough for injury. I've had some overuse injuries from putting on too much weight too quickly. I struggle with my diet of, initially like losing weight and then being like, oh my gosh, I have to put weight back on because I'm tiny and I'm small. And when you run that long, my legs just don't feel as powerful because they have to sustain me for such a long time. So
do you find it, do you have a harder time putting the weight back on or losing the weight?
Putting it back on.
Yeah, that's what I've probably figured, especially if you're burning so many calories when you're training like that. It's got to be, you got to probably eat just a ton of calories to get that weight back on.
Yeah, I'm getting anxious even talking about it because it's February. I know it's coming up, but essentially, like, your body knows where it wants to sit in a way. And so as an athlete, I know where my body wants to sit. When I went through officer candidate school, I ran my fastest 3-mile in 22 minutes, all this stuff. I was 135 pounds. To put that in perspective, I'm like 160, 165 right now. So I was significantly lighter.
Right.
And when I was really in the Marines and going through the basic school and all this kind of stuff, I was sitting at about $150.
Yeah.
Well, bobsledders, for example, are up to 185 pounds. And what you're not carrying or what you don't have on you, you're having to add that weight in the sled, which automatically is making you go slower. So it's been, I've struggled with it. And I've realized that I'm just going to be on the lighter end of the scale. I got up to 170 one year, and that's when I broke my foot from an overuse injury. And I didn't, my body hated it. To your point, I had to eat so much rice, chicken and broccoli. It was insane. I ate so much rice. Like I would have to force myself to eat. And I would like almost want to cry. I'm like, I don't want any more food. I don't want to look at anything. I'm not hungry. It ruined it for me. But when I transfer and I go from bobsled to marine, I don't like how I feel immediately either, because I feel like I don't feel strong. I don't feel like my muscles as much as I want to. My body comp just changes, and then it's exhausting. Then trying to squat, even what I used to 6-7 weeks prior, and it feels like it's impossible.
Yeah.
So all this to say, I've been an athlete my whole life. I know what my body likes. I know what my body doesn't like. And as I get older, I'm like, oh, it gets worse and worse and worse. But all this to say, if it was easy, that means anyone would have done it. There's a reason why it hasn't been done before. And I'm willing to embrace the suck for a little bit longer to continue to do both, because it's never been done before.
Well, and that's so impressive. Like, as someone, I go to the gym 6 days a week, and I'm 6'7", so like I have to, if I want to put weight on, like I have to eat, 280 grams of protein a day, and so I know, like, I don't know how many triple chicken Chipotle bowls I've eaten, but it's like at some point you just look at it and you go, I never want to eat another chicken again. You know what I mean? It's just, it's so much. Like people who don't live that lifestyle, like I've done the cutting, not that intense, but I mean, like I've done the cutting and then the bulking and all that, and it's intense. It's so hard, and it's so mathematical. You got to make sure you do just the right amount of calories, and I mean, it's nuts. And so to be able to do that long, that hard, that is really impressive. Like people don't understand how impressive that really is. Like that's shocking that you can do that for that long and not go absolutely insane.
I'm on my way.
Yeah, I can tell you, I felt that anxiety when you're like, I'm getting anxious even talking about it, because you know it's coming up, because it's just, man. So you're going to be on the cut here in about a month. Oh man.
Finish my bobsled season March 22nd, 23rd. That date is about a month away. So I'm slowly integrating, starting to increase distance and mileage. Like today I went for a 2-mile run. I haven't done that in a while. So it's just slowly building that base, but it's like hilarious when you're like, 2 miles seems like forever. Cause like the farthest I've been running was 100-meter sprints.
Yeah. Right.
And again, like what you're conditioned to, it's great, because if you are that marathon, mile runner, I dare you to go do a sprint workout with me.
Yeah.
And it's going to hit you in a whole different capacity.
I know when I was on the cut, I just loved how I could just run for days, and I could just, you get lighter and you're like, oh man, I can, but then, like when you're in a calorie deficit, you can't lift as much. So you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I feel so weak. And then when you're in a bulk, you're like, oh, I can bench press the world, but then get on a treadmill for 5 minutes and your knees start hurting, your back starts, you're breathing heavy immediately, and you're just never happy.
Yeah. We're speaking the same language.
Yeah, you're just never happy. Yeah. I feel you there. So now bobsledding. So again, I remember the movie Cool Runnings, and I've never associated female bobsledding, right? Like how popular is it? Is it growing?
So the first time the females appeared in the Olympics was in 2002, which really wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And the first time the female had double representation, so 2 events in the Olympics, was this past Olympics that was in China in 2022. So it's growing. It's there. I think it still has a lot to go. So, for example, the movie Cool Runnings, and people ask me all the time, oh, you do 4-man. I was like, well, no, 4-man is for the men only. So the men have 2-man, 4-man. The women used to only have 2 women. And then, like I just mentioned, in 2022, they added monobob, which is 1. So there's still unevenness in the number of athletes on a bobsled team that get to represent their country in the Olympics or in general. So there's way more male athletes than there are women, but it is getting better. It is getting more popular. We're seeing more and more athletes, more and more small nations, and people step up and start competing. But it is one of those things that I wish that we got more coverage than we did. Like if Netflix would just, and I say this on every podcast, if Netflix would just invest in a docuseries like they did on like the cheer or gymnastics or Formula 1, I'm telling you, we would make y'all so much money, because It is such a cool sport. It's that adrenaline. It takes people from all over the world going 90 miles an hour, crashing on your head, like being slammed against the ice in a car crash that like never ends, thrill seeking, drama, all the stuff. It's incredible. But it just doesn't have the viewership. And that's what's so frustrating is people just assume, for example, that bobsled is only on during the Olympics. Well, World Championships is in 2 weeks. People have no idea. People have no idea we've been competing since October and like a full regular season and stuff like that. So we're, as athletes, we're trying to get the word out. We want people to pay attention. We want to get the viewership up, but it's still challenging.
So where would someone watch it? Like ESPN, the Ocho, or how do you watch it? Female bobsled these days?
That's a great question. So there used to be an Olympic channel, got cut, shocker, unfortunately. YouTube, which I know that sounds like what, but YouTube's like a thing now. Like people don't have cable and all this kind of stuff. So every single race, it's with the IBSF, International Bobsled Skeleton Federation. They have like massive cameramen and all the angles. It looks like an NFL game with all the angles and all the stuff, and it's always available to watch on YouTube. And we'll get like up to 5,000 views like per race and stuff like that from all over the world because it's accessible for everybody. But again, just not enough people know about it yet.
No, man. I would watch a Netflix special on that because it just sounds so fascinating.
Right?
I would absolutely watch it.
I have not heard one person that was be like, like I think if people, like I can just envision the trailer now. It's just like ice, people on their heads falling off, like the winter places that you go to and just like the extremes of it. I just think people would fall in love with it.
I'm sure it would be hard to beat, 90 Day Fiance, Married at First Sight, The Ultimatum, Love is Blind. But I think there is a market out there for something like that. So yeah, it'd be awesome. So now another thing that we want to talk about is not only are you Marine, not only are you on the US team bobsled team, but you're also an author. So what got into, you're like, oh, I wasn't doing enough, so let's do more. What got you into writing children's books?
My word is impact. I want to impact as many lives as I possibly can, not to further my own agenda, truly to like inspire and just love on this world. And as you know, everyone has a testimony, everyone has a story. You're given a platform. How are you going to use it? And it wasn't until I was on a bunch of podcasts and I was interviewed by a bunch of news channels and they were like, Riley, you've done so much. What's your next thing? Like, what do you got cooking? And I was like, well, before I turn 30, I want to write a book. And then the next morning I was like, oh my gosh, I just said that on national news. Like now I have to write a book because I just said it. Yeah. So that's where that came in. Now, where do you start for a book? What genre, this, that, and the other. And then, what I talked about today, I never saw a female Marine. Therefore, I never wanted to be a female Marine. Boom, impact. And there's this photo that I have with this little girl when I was at a Marine event in St. Louis. And we were doing pull-ups. And she saw me do pull-ups. And she wanted to do pull-ups. And then she started doing push-ups. And she would walk around and come back with her parents. Her parents were like, where is she? And she was doing more push-ups in front of me. And she would just do push-up after push-up after push-up after push-up and just not stop. And would come back and do it again and do it again. And I was just like inspired and mesmerized by this little girl. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like you can you be my daughter? Like, can I adopt you? Like, is this allowed? Am I allowed to like love someone I've never met? And it hit me because I was like, she just saw a female officer. She just saw at a young age that this is a possible career path for her. How many kids haven't seen that? And I knew from my own personal experience. And then I would have old women come up to me. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea my bobsled or anything. They just saw a woman in uniform. They're like, can we take a picture with a female Marine? We've never saw it. Like I was a museum piece. And I was like, yeah. But again, these thoughts creeped into my head. And I was like, if I want to make a long-lasting impact, start from the beginning. Start when they're young. Teach that story then. And they will be able to have the impact then for years going forward and to influence. So I'm also a Marine. I eat crowns and I can't read. So a children's book was a great place for me to start.
Nice. So what is the book called?
It's called If You Can Dream It, Be It.
Mm.
Pretty telling to what we talked about, being able to visually see someone, being able to dream. And a dream really comes from being able to piece things together in your mind because your brain's familiar with it in some capacity. And then that next step is go be it. If you can dream it,
Yeah.
be it, do it, act on it. And so the book just came out for pre-sale a couple weeks ago. It will release in 3 weeks from today. So March 4th. I am so excited. You guys can get your copy on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, through my publisher, anything like that. And again, the whole goal is impact. I'm a little bit biased when I say it's a little bit more maybe for young women is my target audience, but it doesn't mean that young men can't get something out of it too. And it's a true story that is based off a lot of things that we talk about. I won't give too much of it away, but it's something that I am actually so proud of. I did not go to school to be an author. I had no idea where to start. And it was just something that I feel like God kind of helped me put together. And now I get to share that story with hopefully as many people as possible. So I have a target goal. I want to sell 1,000 books because that means there's 1,000 people who have heard the story at least once, which means that they can go on with the theme of the book to be bold and courageous and impact lives because they now are impacted themselves.
Yeah. That's it. There's one thing that I think is, as you were talking, I always am curious about when people do great things and are generally successful. I always wonder what the traits are that make them that way. And one of the things, my son and I, we do this thing, me and my kids will be eating at the dinner table. And then we do this, like everyone has to say one nice thing about everybody else. And my son said about me, he said, one thing I love about you is that you don't just say you want to do things, you say you want to do them and then you go and actually do them. And and the thing is that what I love about your story is you weren't thinking about being a Marine and then you're like, I want to be a Marine. And then you just did it, right? You're like, hey, that being a bobsledder is cool. I want to do it. And then you figured out a way to do it, right? And hey, I want to write a book. Oh crap, I said it. Now I got to do it. And then you did it. You know what I mean? And I think there's a lesson there. There's so many people out there who just think about things, dream about them, and then never ever do anything about them. And then they turn 50, 60, 70, and then they regret all the things that they never actually did. And so, excuse me, I think there is a huge lesson to be learned there that you can do anything if you actually, do it. And so,
and that's the second piece of that. Because how many people have had a dream that was placed on their heart for a specific reason, for a specific purpose? For example, I don't want to be a doctor. I never thought about being a doctor. I don't want to cut people open. I don't want to see any of that. Like, you're good. Y'all got that, right? Some people are like, I would never want to be a Marine. I'm like, well, yeah, this is my passion, right? And
right.
You have your passion. And that's why we're all unique and perfect in our own way, the way we were created.
Yeah.
But if that passion's put on your heart because you're supposed to fulfill that purpose, and you just dream about it, but you don't act on it, you're letting yourself down and you're letting this world down from being able to be impacted by your beautiful gift.
Yeah. And the thing is that there are things that I've done that I maybe didn't go as far as I wanted to go, but I got some cool stories along the way doing it. You know what I mean?
And that's the second part of it. It's the putting yourself out there. It doesn't mean you're going to be successful. Mm-hmm. I am not the best bobsledder in the world. I just won my first ever gold medal. It took me 4 years.
Wow.
4 years to win.
That doesn't sound like a lot to me. You know what I mean?
To someone who's been in it this long, it's felt like an eternity.
Right.
And it's one of those things where I tell people, I'm like, it's the journey. It's putting yourself out there. It's being honest with yourself. It's telling yourself, I'll put this way. I heard this the other day. No one wants to date or be friends with a liar. Makes sense. I think everyone agrees with that. Yeah. So if you tell yourself that you're going to do something and you don't, who's the liar?
Yeah.
You.
Yeah.
And who do you not like in the morning? You. Who do you not want to spend time with? You. And when I heard that, I was like, it makes sense. So if you set yourself, you want to do it, give yourself a chance to do it. It doesn't mean you're going to succeed. I want to be a best-selling author. I'm going to do everything I can to get picked up. But if I don't hit my goal of selling 1,000 copies or getting to that status, does that mean I failed? Absolutely not, because I did it and I learned something along the way and I put myself out there and I'm proud, and that's a win that I have. So I think that there's that part of it too, where even if it looks like it's not going to go the way you want, even if your podcast isn't the number one most listened to in the top 100 or whatever, does that mean that it's not as good as someone else's? No. Comparison is the thief of joy. We talked about that. 2, you put yourself out there, you were bold and courageous, and you got something about it. And 3, you were true and honest to yourself, to where you were accomplished, which makes you like yourself more, less likely for depression, and more likely to continue to do hard things because you've done it before.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with everything you're saying. And I just did another podcast where it was just me answering listener questions. And one of the things I said in there was it's so surprising. People don't understand success is not like a continuous thing. Most people only have to be sick. They fail and fail and fail, and then they're successful one time, and then they become everything. Well, yeah, but I mean, that's the thing is that you don't strike me as someone who's failed a lot. But I mean,
I have.
But the thing is that that's the point, right? Like Michael Jordan was a 50% shooter. He missed half his shots. Pete Rose, the greatest hitter of all time, missed 6 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Thomas Edison was patented over 1,000 inventions, and all we know is the light bulb.
Yeah.
But man, that was good. You know what I mean?
That part.
So, yeah. So, well, where can people, if they want to follow you, where do they find you?
Yes. So on social media, I'm only on 2 sites. So Instagram, Riley.Tejcek. It's the one with more followers, not the 50 fake accounts. And then secondly, you can find me on LinkedIn. I decided to adult a couple months ago, and so I made a LinkedIn, Riley Tejcek. You can find me there. And that also gives you access to email me or something like that. I always end every podcast, or at least want people to know, if there's anything you heard today that inspired you, you have questions about, or you want to follow up on, please reach out to me. I had a call today with someone who listened to one of my old podcasts that was like, you said something and I just wanted to talk to you about it. And I was like, heck yeah, people are listening. So all that means is I want to be able to be a resource. I want you to know that you're loved. I want you to know that you're cared about. And if any part of my story resonated with you in any capacity, I'm happy to dive further into it, talk to you more, or elevate you in that process as well.
Awesome. Well, that's awesome. Well, we're going to have you back after the launch and see how things went and all that. And good luck on your cut. I know how difficult that is. Okay. I've been on a bulk for a couple of years now. So, so I appreciate it. Well, for those who are listening, thanks for listening. Subscribe, hit the subscribe button. You can find us anywhere. Follow Captain. It's Captain officially. Captain Tejcek, and we will talk to you. We got a bunch of more exciting ones coming up, so stay tuned. Thanks for listening.